Are you tired?
No.
Who was yawning just now?
Me, but does that mean it doesn't mean I'm tired?
No, your brain just needs oxygen, right?
We know.
Are you tired?
Didn't we learn that it's about brain cooling?
Yeah, brain cooling. Yeah, there was that too.
Brain cooling, yeah. That was an interesting paper.
Yeah.
Good memory, Patrick.
Yeah, and we got feedback from the author, I remember.
We usually get feedback.
Yeah.
Or at least a comment. All right, let's wait a few more minutes because I know a couple of other people wanted to join. Here we go, dropping in as we speak. It is a grant submission week for quite a few people in the team.
So which grant is ERC? No, it's what?
Marie Curie.
Marie Curie. Yes, I saw it.
Yeah.
So who is doing it? You are doing it, Steffi?
No, I got it, silly.
Yeah, you got it. So who is doing it? So
Lia and Valentina.
Okay. So you cannot apply. You cannot apply twice. Oh, sorry.
Don't think you should. Time to move on. It's onwards and upwards, right? Yeah, no. I was grant writing. It was so funny. I was grant writing yesterday.
But yeah, because, no, I was saying that because I saw your post with your dog, and so you are writing a grant too. So
Yeah, but not Marie Curie. But yeah, he walked in and he randomly found this post-it note somewhere in the house and brought in the post-it. It looked so funny.
He's almost ready to write it, so it will be good.
Almost ready. He's definitely having intellectual contribution to it. Should make him author.
It would be so good. Actually, wasn't there like a paper where Cat was author on that paper?
Seriously?
I think so.
Patrick, what did you do?
Can you send the link?
I need to find it.
Yeah,
sure. That's also so clear.
Oh, that's hilarious.
No, there was an article. I think it was about Cat. Yeah, I think I saw that, but it was not about Cat writing. Article.
No. You mean the awesome Cats are good paper?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think I saw this one.
Amazing. Those who don't know, I need to find it again.
Yeah.
Just remember a few years ago the scandal because someone added his kindergarten child as an author to all the papers.
Really?
Yeah.
You start through early.
Train him young. Right, it's 9:30. Welcome to Neuroccino. Today we have Pedro who's going to present a paper to us, and he's new, so be nice to him, please. The way it works is everyone can just join us, bring a paper you found interesting or a book chapter, and quickly present it to us. Tell us why you thought it was interesting, what the authors did, and then we discuss it. Pedro, if you want to share the link in the chat here, and I'll put it over on YouTube as well. And then just share your screen.
Okay.
And we take it from there. Perfect.
Shall I send you the link or?
Yeah, if you could just drop it in the chat, that'd be great. And then I copy and paste it over to YouTube. Lovely. Thank you so much. Take it away.
Thank you. Hi, good morning, everyone. So the paper that I'm going to present, its title is Neuroprosthesis for Decoding Speech in a Paralyzed Person with Anarthria. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine about 3 months ago by a group from the University of California. And I brought this paper because I found very interesting how the authors could directly decode speech by recording brain activity in real time. So Anarthria is a clinical condition that is characterized by an inability to speak due to an articulation problem. So these patients, they have the language networks working fine. The problem is not in language networks, but in the brain centers that control the coordination of the muscles, of our muscles, that coordinate our tongue muscles, our lips, our respiratory tract in order to produce appropriate sounds. And this condition, anarthria, can be caused by different diseases, such as stroke or some neuromuscular diseases, such as the amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, the disease that, for instance, Stephen Hawking suffered from. And usually these diseases, they do not only provoke this problem in articulation of speech, but they also provoke motor problems in the limbs. So these patients, they do not only they are not only unable to produce speech, but they also have motor problems, so they cannot, for instance, write or use sign language to communicate. And of course, this is a very severe problem in terms of their quality of life. So until now, the usual approach to this condition was to use these brain-computer interfaces in which the patients using the eye movements or head movements or slight movements they still have in their hands, they control and they select, they perform like letter by letter selection in these computer interfaces, or they selected like pre-chosen words in a group of words in these interfaces. However, as you can imagine, this is not an optimal solution, because it is a slow process, and it demands a lot of efforts from the patient. So in this paper, the authors try to understand if it was possible to directly decode speech by recording electrical activity in the brain, and then produce speech by this direct decoding in real time. In this case, so they studied, actually it was one study, one case study. So they studied one patient who was 36 years old of age, and he had a stroke when he was 20 years of age. And this stroke was in the brainstem, more specifically in the pons. And this stroke caused anarthria and severe motor deficits in the forelimbs. So in terms of speech, this patient was only able to vocalize grunts and moans. And as the stroke was in the brainstem, his cognition was completely intact. And the way the patient tried to, or used to do the method to communicate that the patient used was by typing using these computer interfaces, and the patient was able to approximately say or perform like 5 correct words per minute. In terms of the device that the authors use, so the authors use high-density electrocorticography electrode array, which was composed by 128 electrodes. And these electrodes were placed in the pile surface of the brain, in the subdural space, and the location of implantation was, of course, in the left hemisphere, more specifically in the left precentral gyrus, left postcentral gyrus, in the posterior part of the middle frontal gyrus, and also in the posterior part of the inferior frontal gyrus. So these electrodes recorded brain activity, and of course this signal was then processed. And in terms of this process, the authors analyzed high gamma frequencies, so frequencies between 70 and 150 hertz. Then the patient had like word and sentence tasks that he had to perform, and this was done in 50 sessions that lasted approximately 1 year and a half. And in each section, they collected about half an hour of neural activity. And the first task was an isolated word task. So the patient had 50 English words, and these words appeared in a screen. And as soon as they turned green, the patient was asked to read these words or try to read these words. And the patient also had a second task, which was a sentence task. And this task was composed by 50 English sentences that consisted of the 50 words that were part of the word task. And the design was the same. The sentences appear in a screen, and the patient was asked to try to read these sentences. And this sentence task was done only in the final sections. There is also like a variant of this task, which was a conventional variant in which the patient was presented with some questions and he had to try to answer these questions. So this picture illustrates like this experiment. So here we have the patient. Here we have the electrodes recording the neural activity in the left hemisphere. Then we have the neural processing system, and here we have the language task. And then, of course, these signals have to be modeled. And here the authors used 3 different steps. So after neuroscience processing, there was a speech detection model. So in this speech detection model, the authors or the algorithm, and it was based in a deep learning algorithm. The goal of this algorithm was to detect when the patient started trying to speak. So it was a speech detection step. After this speech detection step, these groups of speech channels went to a word classification algorithm. So in this word classification algorithm, the signals were processed, and the output was predicted word probabilities. So the algorithm predicted the probability of a certain word to correspond to this signal, and each word was associated with a certain probability. And finally, the last step was a language model. So of course we know that in a sentence in English or in another language, after a certain word, the probabilities of a second word are different. So of course, after I, it's more probable to come M than R. So this language model adjusted for these probabilities. So in the word classification, we have certain probabilities, and then the language model chooses the more appropriate words. And sometimes, as in this case, the word that was chosen was not exactly the one that with highest probability in the word classification model. And finally, the authors evaluated the performance of the patient using 2 main measures. So word error rate, and this word error rate was the number of wrong words divided by the total number of words in a sentence, and also the number of words decoded per minute. So like a measure of speed. And here we have the results. So these results are for the sentence task. And here we see the word error rate in a certain sentence in 3 points. Of course, the error rate by chance, without language model, the last step that I showed you, and with language model, so all the models that I showed you. And of course, the word error rate by chance was very high. Then with speech selection and word classification models, the error rate was about 60%, and this word error rate decreased a lot to around 25% when the language model was added. In this next graph, we have like the speed measures, so the number of words decoded per minute, and it was around, the median was 15 words per minute that the patient was able to produce. And I remember that with the brain interface or with the computer interface, the patient was only able to produce around 5 words per minute. And here we have the number of correct words. So the number of correct words was lower, of course, and with a median about 12 correct words per minute. Here in this graph, we have the percentage of trials in which the decoded sentence length was correct. So the number of trials in which this speech detection algorithm correctly identifies a word as a word. So, and we can see that most of the trials, the number of words in the sentence were correct. Here we have also the performance of the patient in the different sentences that compose this sentence task. And we have two colors in this graph. The green color corresponds to the performance of the patient with the language model included, and the blue color corresponds to the performance of the patient without the language model. And these circles correspond to the average performance. And of course, the same results. So as in the last graph, the language model improved, quite improved a lot the performance of this interface. And here are some examples of, so for instance, in this target sentence, hello, how are you? The decoded algorithm without last step, this language model step, decoded like angry, how am I you? But with decoded, the signal decoded with the language model, these errors were corrected to the correct sentence. And the same thing with the second sentence, for instance, I like my nurse. The model without, or the decoding without language model transformed it, I write my nurse, but the error was again corrected with this language model algorithm. Finally, the authors also tried to understand in this array of 128 electrodes, which were the ones that contributed the most to correctly decode these signals. So here, each dot represents one electrode. So here is the electrode array in the left hemisphere. And here we have these two steps of classification, the speech detection step and the word classification step. And we can see that for speech detection, the electrodes that contributed the most were these ones in the more dorsal part of the array, like corresponding to this posterior region of the middle frontal gyrus, while for word classification step, the electrodes that contributed the most were these ones located in the more ventral regions of the brain, like next to this posterior part of the inferior frontal gyrus. Finally, the authors also showed like this matrix showing like the different words or the 50 words that were used in this algorithm. And you can see here the target word and the predicted word, and here the percentage or the accuracy of the prediction, and the accuracy was quite homogeneous across the different words that were used. Finally, the authors also had another question. So they try to understand, or they ask, is this prediction, so the experiment lasted for 1 year and a half, and the authors try to understand, is this signal predictions constant over the time? Is the brain activity constant over the time, or do the accuracy of the prediction changes over this 1 year and a half? So they analyze the classification accuracy using only the last sessions, and also using more data corresponding to all the sessions. And they showed that the classification accuracy also improved with more data, even if it was older data. And they also showed that the classification accuracy for the different groups of data was homogeneous. That information is in the supplementary materials, and unfortunately I could not, I didn't have access to the supplementary materials. And so in the discussion, so the authors say that this method allow to produce more words per minute, and this can be a very useful tool to improve the communication of these patients that of course are very impaired. And they also reinforce the importance of including this language model technique. So not only recording neural signals, but also this speech detection and word classification, including these language specificities. And also they highlight this difference between the dorsal electrodes and the ventral electrodes. So the dorsal electrodes are more important for speech detection, while the ventral electrodes are more important for word classification. And of course, this technique has to be improved, and the error rate was still high, but I found it quite amazing how they were able to directly decode such a complex output as speech directly and in real time by brain signals. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. That is an amazing paper. I'm guessing there's questions in the room. No? None? I got, okay, here we go.
Yes, thanks a lot for presenting. I've got quite a lot of questions because it's really interesting. And so first off, I was kind of wondering, where do you see could this whole procedure or pipeline still improve? At the level of the word selection model, or at the level of the language model itself? Or do you think that there might be some chances for improvement even in the decision where to place the electrodes? As we, for instance, know that language is certainly lateralized, or most aspects of language functions are lateralized in most people towards the left hemisphere, but certainly some aspects of language are still also based on the interaction with the right hemisphere, or even lateralized towards the right. So is there any clear point where you could see some potential improvements?
Yes, I think in terms of electrode placement, I think I don't know if it is possible in terms of the technique and for the patient, but including more anterior areas in the prefrontal lobe, for instance, in the inferior frontal gyrus, I think in terms of, for instance, word classification might improve word classification algorithm, because they just included like the most posterior part of the inferior frontal gyrus, and I think at least the middle region of the inferior frontal gyrus, and maybe could be like the also important for the word classification, and these more interior parts also of the middle frontal gyrus are also for speech planning. I think they are important. Regarding the right hemisphere, I think for like prosody and I don't know, intuition. I'm not sure if it is correct or not, but for prosody of speech, I think functionally it would be very important, because I imagine that this speech, the authors also provide a video, but I could not, I didn't have access to the video, but I imagine that this speech was really like monotonous and without like intuition and prosody, and functionally prosody is very important to understand if we are doing a question, or if you are to like the intuition of our speech. So I think it would be very interesting to include like right hemisphere electrodes.
And probably, if I may, one question with regards to the actual language model. So it appears to me as if within the language model, certainly grammar was somewhat coded, but did they go into detail what other, I would call it, modules are included in this language model that they used?
They don't, so they don't give details on these models in the paper. They had a lot of materials in the supplementary materials, so I suppose they give these details in the supplementary materials, but unfortunately I didn't have access to that, because they in the paper, in the manuscript, they just say they use deep learning techniques to create these models, but they don't specify what they exactly did, but I suppose it is in the supplementary materials, but I cannot, sure. I don't know the answer.
Not an issue. Thanks a lot for presenting this.
Thanks, Patrick. You raised two questions that were on my list as well. So that's great. Hervé, do you have a question?
Me? No, I was just wondering on the language modeling. I was searching, so I didn't. I don't have the article here, but I was wondering if they use some kind of very famous language modeling, like the one from Google or Microsoft or some stuff like that.
I guess we got to check if we have access to the supplementary material.
Yes, they specify one model that I didn't know, but they use like this Viterbi decoder. I don't know if you know what it is or not, but it's like from what I saw, it's like a common way to decode like complex signals. And they refer that they had already used it previously in other works.
Okay. Okay, so no, because they are, yeah.
But I don't know more details. I don't know more details.
No, because these companies are looking to customize their way of predicting sentences and stuff like that. So they are more advanced than other, more public or more less private sectors. So
actually, the article was sponsored by Facebook. They tell it in the paper.
Yeah. There's the answer.
Yes.
Okay, makes sense now.
Yes.
Thanks.
Such an interesting paper. Coming back to the anatomy of it, So in that beautiful figure, you show that the strip is pretty much on the motor cortex. But in the introduction, you mentioned the ventral premotor cortex and the posterior middle and posterior inferior temporal. So I was wondering if you could go back and clarify the anatomy again, because on the picture it looks different. There's no temporal.
Yes, so they place the electrodes in the pre-central gyrus and in the post-central gyrus, and also in these posterior parts of the middle frontal gyrus and inferior frontal gyrus. And the electrodes, actually the ones that predict like speech detection, here it seems to be like in this transition between the precentral and the middle frontal gyrus, but here they seem to overlap like the motor cortex, the precentral gyrus. I would expect that they would be more anterior, like in the inferior frontal gyrus in the Broca area, but actually the ones that predicted it more were they seem to be in the motor cortex. They don't specify exactly, they just say dorsal electrodes and ventral electrodes, but at least by this illustration, it seems to be like for word classification, the electron seems to overlap the motor cortex. I was not expecting that, but I don't know if
well, I guess it's a difference between language and speech, right?
Yes.
So what we're picking up here would be the motor signal of articulating a word from the motor cortex, rather than the high-level cognitive input to language. Patrick, you look like you disagree.
No, I do agree, but I'm still then kind of wondering, wouldn't you also expect at least some electrodes, well, within the premotor cortex? Wasn't there more or less a direct link between pars orbicularis, triangularis, or Broca's area and PMC?
I mean, the entire area is covered with U-shaped fibers. So yes, you would expect there to be a connection. And also that's like, I'm guessing the contribution of the ventral electrode is also not surprising. That's more posterior because you have those U-shaped networks everywhere to connect the neighboring gyri. But it's a shame not to have the connection anatomy with it. But that leaves room to things to explore. I was also wondering, so you mentioned that they have a speech rate of 5 words per minute?
With the computer interface that the patient used before.
Yeah, that was 5 words per minute, right?
5 words per minute. And with this method, the median was 15 words per minute. The total number of words and correct words were around 12.
Just still, like in comparison, like healthy, normal communication is about 150 words, if I'm not mistaken, per minute on average. So that shows you how much room there still is to speed up things. You also mentioned that the study took 1.5 years. I was wondering how long the training took. Did the author specify that?
So the training was done in this period. So the training was the recording and the training. Do you mean if there was a training before the electrode placement, or?
Yeah, like the training of the algorithm and the patient to.
Yes, so they performed 50 sessions The first sessions, most of the sessions were with the word task. So they just performed the sentence task in the last 7 sessions. So this performance was evaluated in the last 7 sessions, because they also report the results of the word task, but the main interest was in the sentence task. So they report the results for these like the last 7 sessions. So the training took over these 50 sessions. But in this graph, when they used like only the data, they used only the training data from these last sessions. The accuracy, the classification accuracy is a bit lower, but it's lower. Yes, it's lower than with all the data. I don't know if it was. Yeah, it's a bit lower. Yes, with only these 8 sessions.
Okay, Patrick, you have a question again?
Probably just one thing to clarify here. So they evaluated everything here with regards to their test. Hence, they had some specific target sentences, right? And just a limited set of words or sentences in total that they tested for. But what I was wondering is, did they also try to basically see to what extent their method was capable of actually decoding spontaneous speech by the subject? Because that is obviously what we need here, right? We need to have a method that basically really allows someone to speak freely their mind and decodes this and translates it into words.
Yes, I think that would be very interesting. So they didn't do that. They just used like these 50 words and 50 sentence, and the 50 sentence were composed by the 50 words. And I think it's still like a step forward, because previously patients had to choose letter by letter or from a group of pre-specified words, and but I think there is still a lot to do. But I think that would be very interesting to try. But they didn't do that. They just test the prediction of the words they had used in the task, not new words.
Yeah. So I hope that some other studies will come out at some point, and hopefully even potentially a way for this particular participant to actually use this in daily life. Because this is another thing that makes me wonder about like the ecological validity or of the entire idea, because obviously it's an invasive technique here that they're using. I was wondering if they, for instance, discussed if previous approaches have tried it with extracranial EEG, where you don't go into or beneath the skull, basically just use standard EEG. I bet that those techniques will be worse, potentially because of the spatial resolution or lack of thereof. But really wondering if that shouldn't also be or has been studied before. So did you see them mentioning some other approaches here?
They mentioned previous work on this, but I didn't read the other articles. I'm not sure if it was done with EEG or not. I don't know.
Sure, no problem.
They had a previous work that was published in Nature Communications, when they used this, I think, a similar approach to decode like letters, and then they tried like speech, but I think it was always with the intracranial electrodes. But I'm not sure if they did it with EEG or not. superficial EEG.
Okay,
I
thanks.
mean, I guess we're still at the level of proof of principle, right?
Yes.
So until we can go to natural spontaneous speech and non-invasive techniques, we're probably looking at a couple of years still.
Yeah.
But in terms of like helping patients now, even though it's invasive, this is a wonderful, fantastic step in the right direction. But you're right, in terms of validating it, well, yes, it's kind of circular because you only give in a certain amount of words and then you test to get those words back. And also another question obviously will be how much variability is there in the detection and the decoding of those signals from the brain? Are we all doing it in the same areas with the same patterns, or is there huge variability and you need to actually move your grid of electrodes around? But I guess those are all questions that will be answered in the future. But super interesting study. Thank you very much, Pedro. Is there any other questions? No? Everyone happy? Well, fantastic. Well, in that case, thank you so much for coming to Neuroccino today. We wish you a wonderful and exciting week in science, and we shall see you next week. Any takers for next week? Oh, the silence. Right. Evie?
Oh, no, not me. Not me.
Yeah, I'm muted. I thought you were just... Come on, you have a choice. Chapters. You still have some chapters of the book left.
Yes, but I need to read them before to present them. So.
And where's the saxophone this week?
Yes, true.
Look at you. Right. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you next week with a surprise presentation by someone. Have a good week.